Would you want to get started by telling us maybe a little bit about yourself, your background, and kind of how you came to be associated with Adfontes? And then we could
Sure.
even go on to talk a little bit about Adfontes, if that's okay.
Perfect. That's perfectly fine. First of all, is the audio okay? Can you hear me fine?
Yep, we can hear you.
Excellent. All right. So my name is Alejandro Munoz, but I go by Alex. My whole life I've gone by Alex. Um, Born in New York. I'm going to take it way back. Born in New York, grew up in Rhode Island, the smallest state in the nation. And I graduated high school in 2000, the year 2000, Y2K. Long time ago. What grade am I speaking to, by the way?
These are like 9 through 12,
Nice, nice.
Four,
It's a good
14,
age.
18-year-olds.
Great age. All right, so I went to college I went to Boston College where I double majored in accounting and finance. Graduated in 2004. Went to work in New York City for one of the big four accounting firms, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Did that for a couple of years and realized I didn't like it. So I wanted to try something new. Both of my parents are Colombian, Colombia from South America, and I moved to Colombia and worked over there for 5 years before coming back to the States. I did corporate for a little bit longer in the US. I moved to Miami specifically. And then I wanted to try something completely different. I'm one who firmly believes that, if you have a dream, follow it, whether it's professional, personal, what have you. So I decided to become, this is going to sound weird, brace yourselves, a bartender in Miami. Miami's big on tourism. The hospitality industry is huge, so a lot of restaurants, hotels, bars. And in high school, that's when I first had the idea of becoming like a bartender. But I was able to realize or materialize that dream, if you will, late into my adult life. I think I was 33 when I became a bartender. So I did that for a few years. Absolutely loved it. One of my favorite jobs, because of the fact that you're constantly meeting people, hearing their stories. Actually, now I'm facing you guys. I was facing my laptop. So you're constantly interacting with people of all walks of life. You hear great stories. I had the opportunity. I worked at a pretty upscale restaurant bar in Miami, so I got the opportunity to meet a lot of celebrities. So that was pretty cool. And then realize, all right, I'm not going to be a bartender all my life. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that if you go down that route. But I want to try something else, get back into corporate, if you will, and got this job. I saw the post, the job offer online, and I really like the fact that so the company is called Adfontes Media, and it's basically we're rating the news. So we're reading, watching newscasts all day, and rating it, giving it a score, and to put it on our chart, which I'll show in a second. But that's basically how I got involved with the company. That's a little bit about me personally. So now I'll explain what the company is about. So the company Adfontes Media was founded, I believe, maybe like 5-6 years ago by a lady by the name of Vanessa Otero, who's a lawyer in Colorado. And seeing how polarized the country was, especially politically, she did this on her spare time. She would read the news and then classify it or put it like on a makeshift chart. And she would post that on her Instagram page, I believe, or one of her social media accounts. And then she got a following, and people were asking her, hey, I want you to rate more news. So that's how the company started to grow, because she hired analysts, and that's what I am. I'm an analyst at the company to read and rate news. And right now, I believe we are 60 analysts, so it's grown quite a bit. And we have partnerships with some big companies, such as Meta, formerly known as Facebook. And so yeah, so what we do is, when you get hired, she'll ask you, and she interviewed me personally, she'll ask you, what lean are you? Are you a left or Democrat? Are you center? Are you right leaning or conservative? And then, so she hires people from all the political spectrum. And then we'll have these meetings, and this is the crux of what I do. We have these meetings where 3 analysts will participate, one from the left, one a center analyst, and a right analyst. And then we'll read simultaneously, but on our own, like my own computer. We work remotely, by the way. There's no brick and mortar office, so everything is virtual. And so we'll sit, read a particular article, and then rate it. And then there's always a facilitator to that meeting. And I just had a meeting and I was a facilitator. So then once all our scores are in, or the 3 scores, for bias and for reliability, that's what we're looking at. We're focused on if an article or any type of news content or media is biased to the left, center, or right, or how reliable the information is, the underlying information. So, and I'll show that chart in a second, so you get a better idea of what I'm talking about. But then we'll rate, we'll give it a rating for bias and reliability. And if we are within 8 points of each other, we'll just move on to the next article. We'll be like, all right, we're close enough. If not, if there's a spread that's larger than 8, then we'll enter into discussion, and we'll ask around, hey, Mike, why'd you rate it so low or so high? And then we debate. Sometimes some of the articles cover some hot button issues or very controversial issues, so we could have heated debates or conversations. But that's exciting. Everybody's really cool, down to earth, very knowledgeable. So yeah, so it never gets to the point where we're like fighting or anything like that, because that'd be ridiculous. But yeah, that's basically that's what I do. That's what the company's all about. Oh, and so with those ratings, with those scores that we give the articles, individual articles or videos, if it's a website that has a newscast or whatever, there'll be an average. Those scores get averaged out, and then we end up with an overall average score for the source. So let's say CNN, for example, will have an average score for that, for both bias and reliability. And that's it. It gets mapped on a chart, and people can, individuals, companies, whomever that has access to this chart can see where these newscasts or news sources lie. And why is that important? That's important, and this is the reason also, other than the polarization, which I mentioned at the outset. The real big reason for this, and why we exist and I'm doing what I'm doing, is because the news was so polarized that advertisers, companies with a lot of money on hand, that would like to advertise on news sources before the internet existed and technology got so advanced as it is now. You had newspapers, regular, newspaper. You read the newspaper, the physical newspaper, and companies would advertise on it. You would see ads. But companies got away from doing that on digital newspapers because of the polarization, and that's affected the newspapers themselves, the companies. because if you don't have revenue coming in, they end up cutting people, so the staff becomes smaller, so the quality of the content you're producing is not as good. So that's the real reason. And journalism, let me put this parentheses in here. Journalism, and I wasn't privy to this, or I didn't know this because like I said, I studied accounting and finance, which is totally business focused, and I really never knew about journalism other than when I used to pick up the paper or read something online. But journalism is fundamental, it's instrumental to the proper running of a democracy, because journalism is what exposes things that go on, that things that the government does. Without a free and fair journalistic realm, if you will, you wouldn't have a democracy. You'd go into some other structures of government that you see some other places around the world, maybe like Russia, Cuba, those countries come to mind. So journalism is really, really important to the functioning of a democracy, which the US is. So with that being said, I would like to show, and I know maybe this is sounding really formal, but let's make this informal. I'm going to show the chart that we use to classify news sources. Basically, if I come down here, these are some of our customers or partners. Here's Meta, which I mentioned before. The Trade Desk is a big company that handles advertising dollars. And they kind of decide where to distribute that money. So they use our information to make informed decisions as to where they're going to place those advertising dollars. If you go on our homepage, the one I just showed, everybody has access, can access or research 5 sources for free per day. But if you want unlimited access, then you would have to go in and pay. But this is what it looks like here. Let me move my video box out of the way. And so these are all the news sources that we've rated. We've rated a ton because we're doing this on a daily basis. And like I said, there's like 60 analysts, so it's a lot of work. So if you notice the vertical axis here, the y-axis, this is where we're giving it a score, and you see it's numbered from 0 to, well, it goes up to 64. That would be the top of the top. But here visible is 0 to 56, and these are the rating rubrics, or the buckets, if you will. So all the way at the top, we have something that's original fact reporting, really high effort. This is something, like some articles maybe that are really long, so there's word count. There are multiple contributors on that article. Maybe there's on-the-ground reporting, first-hand accounts, and maybe exposing something new, so that would be up there, and it's very difficult to get up there. As a matter of fact, I'm looking at the chart right now, and there's nothing there as a whole, because remember, these are sources. So like a CNN would be here, a Fox News. We rate Joe Rogan Podcasts, which I actually see right off the bat, it's down here. But anyway, so I'll work my way down. So even though we may have, and I particularly have rated articles that are higher than a 56, but the overall score for the source itself is not up there. Then we go down to the next bucket from 48 to 56, thorough fact reporting or fact-dense analysis. From 40 to 48, mix of fact reporting and analysis, or simple fact reporting. So this is where most of the reliable news sources will end up. Your local news sources will end up here. Analysis, then from 32 to 40, analysis or wide variation in reliability. This could also include some opinion. And then from 24 to 32, we say, all right, this category is for opinion pieces. Something that you can clearly see that, a lot of the sentences, there are clues or cues that we use to, to pick up on the fact that it's opinion or analysis or fact. But so this is where opinion would lie. And then anything under 24 we consider problematic. It's egregiously selective or incomplete. It just covers one side of the story. It could have a very problematic headline, or there are a lot of insults in the article or the newscast. So a lot of time foul language also, that's not so professional. So anything like that would be under 24, specifically 16 to 24. And then 8 to 16, we have misleading information. It's information that's was purposefully written to mislead the consumer, the final consumer. A lot of times we'll get information, we'll read articles about maybe like COVID or the vaccines and stuff like that have not scientifically proven information, and we deem it to be misleading. And then 0 to 8, let me see why, let me move this chart up. I'm not sure why this is not popping up, but this says contains inaccurate or fabricated information. So this is the intent of the author is just to come up with something out of thin air and something that's completely false. So that's the lowest of the low. And also not too many sources in that area. Okay, and that was the y-axis. Let's look at the x-axis, which is here horizontally, and this is where we're rating and giving a score to the bias. So anything on the left, obviously most extreme left. So that would be like progressive, or well, something on the most extreme left would be really progressive, really Democrat, or even communist ideas or notions. And then, so this spans anywhere from extreme to hyperpartisan, strong, just slightly skews. And then we have the middle or no bias, or balanced bias. And then the same thing occurs to the right, or really conservative viewpoints. A lot of times there tends to be, and you can see with this kind of curve, this kind of bell curve that has formed with the data points or sources, is that there's a correlation between a lot of bias and unreliability. So you see these down here below, well, the ones in the kind of this red bracket here, which is really problematic. They're down here and they're either really left or really right. So, so that's that. Nothing else really comes to mind. Maybe we can open it up for Q&A, and then, some more information, some new information can come out of that.
You talked about some civil discourse that sometimes they're not necessarily like heated, but that there are some arguments in with some of the stories or some of the hot button issues. Would you be able to maybe share some of the topics and whatever detail you feel comfortable with? Like, what were you discussing that there's a big disagreement?
Yeah, sure. So so for the most experienced analysts, the ones that have been with the company for a while, and so these what we call them pods, the meetings, right? They're 2-hour shifts. So like I said, there'll be somebody from the left, somebody center, and I consider myself a center, so I represent the centers in my whenever we have a shift, and then there's a right-leaning analyst. So we constantly change who we work with. That's kind of randomized. But over time, you work with the same people kind of over and over, and especially if they've been with the company for a while. But so we kind of know each other's perspectives, and how liberal or conservative they can be. So that, I think that in of itself is a factor that prevents us also from having, really heated debates. But when they do occur, they're around the hot button issues like abortion. COVID is a big one. Immigration is another big one. And obviously, okay, so let's take immigration, for example. That's a hot button issue right now, with let's call it the crisis at the border. So the left-leaning analysts or liberals are usually pro-immigration. That's a big generalization, but for the purposes of this example, let's just keep it at that. While conservatives are anti-immigration, more let's control the border, and stuff like that. So we could have heated debates on how a particular article is written, and let's say it's about all these immigrants or undocumented people coming across the border. The right lean is going to probably, if that article is not mentioning the fact that it's a crisis, or it's kind of applauding, let's say, the Biden administration and its efforts to mitigate whatever's going on down at the border, then the right lean might see that as a very left-leaning article, and will assign it that. And then the left lean will obviously, because that person's biased to the left, then might not see it as such a strong left lean. But then we'll engage in friendly discussion, and maybe try to adjust our scores based on what we saw. So we also, when we're rating, we're moving our sliders to give it a score on a chart like that looks exactly like this. And we also have a space or a box where we can put our comments. I'll copy and paste stuff from the article, like passages from the article, into my dashboard. And then I'll use that to formulate my argument if I have to, argue my scores. So that's what happens. There are times where we can't come to a consensus, where either the left, the right, or myself will not budge and say, no, I saw it this way. I'm going to keep my score as is. And even though we're more than 8 apart, we'll send it off to another pod. So I'll go into a different pod where a different set of eyes will take a look at it and hopefully come to a consensus then. If not, it just keeps going until there's a consensus, or the scores will remain as is, and they'll get averaged out.
You want to ask about the Joe Rogan podcast? I know you do.
Oh, I know, that's why I mentioned it. I knew somebody was.
Go ahead.
Where does it rank on the bias scale?
For the Joe Rogan podcast?
Yeah.
All right, let's do this exercise real quick.
It's right there.
Here, I'm going to search, and like I said, you can go onto our homepage and search up to 5 sources per day. So, but I have unlimited searches since I'm in my company account. But let's see, Joe Rogan.
I just wanted to kind of comment. So Joe Rogan, I think the last analyst we talked to, an older fella, he kind of explained that, I think this is true if my memory is correct, that Joe Rogan Podcast contacted you guys because I think they didn't like their score or something, or they saw that they were too far right. And they're like, well, can you look at more? Because we have people on the left on here. And so I think the factual credibility still stayed pretty low, but the bias moved a little bit closer to the center than the far right, because, you had like Steven Pinker or Sam Harris or like other liberal type folks on. Is your understanding, or that's what I was told maybe like a year and a
Yeah,
half.
so I wasn't aware of the Joe Rogan or Joe Rogan actually reaching out to Ad Fontes and asking for like a score check. But I've heard of other sources doing that. So they'll say, I don't agree with our scores. Just like you just mentioned, can you look at more? Or they'll, for example, if we rated something really problematic, sometimes they can come back and say, you know what, we're going to delete it. We're going to delete it from our database. So you try to find that article and you can't anymore. So that's going to raise their score. But that's actually good practice. Because you don't want a lot of, misinformation or unreliable information floating around them. But the Joe Rogan, you're right. And for something to be put on our chart, we have to rate a minimum of 15 articles or podcasts or videos, what have you. So 15. And then if we haven't gotten to that 15, you won't even find it on the chart. That's my understanding anyway. And then with the more content we rate, the scores will be adjusted over time. But I was able to pull up the Joe Rogan Experience, the podcast, and if I hover over it, the reliability, you can see it averages out to a 16.87, so virtually 17, and a bias score of 6.28. And that's for the overall podcast. Now, these individual data points, these are the standalone podcasts. So it's wide ranging. The furthest left you have is it was called, it doesn't give us the name of the actual episode, but there's a link to it. And it got rated a minus 25. And just like you said, Jonathan, it could really depend on who the guest is. And the furthest right we have is a 24. Yeah. So, and then, there's been some podcasts in terms of reliability that have scored really higher than a 48. And then the lowest one, I think, is this one, an 11. So whatever this one was, or whoever was on it, was spreading false information, inaccurate, fabricated information. But these are, I must say, I really enjoy it when I have like a podcast session. A 2-hour session where we're just looking at podcasts, and sometimes these Joe Rogan podcasts or episodes are 2 hours long. So it's just, we'll look at that one podcast for that shift, and it's exciting. I mean, I personally like the podcast. It's very interesting. So yeah.
So on a personal level, what would you say is like the gold standard, or your favorite at least, left-wing source, middle source, and right-wing source?
So I try to stay like really, I mean, you have some that are in the middle, and I think those are the most quality news sources. You'll have like NPR is there. You have The Hill. That's a pretty, I think that one leans slightly right. And then you have your conventional news sources, such as, the ones that everybody knows about, like CNN, that's classic left, and then Fox News, that's classic right. But for like me personally, I'll consume like news from like NPR. Really like that, but I read articles because I also consume news through, I have an iPhone, so like Apple News, and you can select which topics you want to read about. So I'll just flip through that and check out the headlines. So that could be from any source, But working for this company, and I used to be an auditor before when I worked in accounting. That's reviewing other people's work. That's what an auditor does. You're looking at companies' financial data and financial reports. So I kind of developed an eye early on for detecting like problems, if you will. So that has transferred over to this job. So I can kind of pick up on the bias now easily, especially after having worked here and all the experience I've gotten. If there's bias, or if the information that I'm reading about is not that reliable.
So with a minute and a half, as neatly as
man.
possible, would you be able to give the biggest misconception you have on media and advice to high school students?
The biggest misconception, well, I think a lot of people just take for granted that whatever you're consuming, whether it be on TV, online, whatever, is factual and unbiased. That's the way it is, and that's not so. You got to keep an open eye, open mind, open ears, and try to avoid being too fanatical. Being too fanatical in anything is not a good thing. Whether it's in sports or in the media and journalism. And I guess that's why I'm a senator, like I avoid the extremes. So don't fall prey to conspiracies and stuff like that, which can come from any side of the aisle. So know that even though an adult is telling you, that you have a news reporter or host that's very popular, that they're almost celebrities nowadays, that they're an adult and they could be very intelligent, doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right information, or unbiased information. So just be aware of that.